Welcome to Work from the Inside Out, a podcast that highlights real-life stories, practical strategies, and best practices for transitioning your career from unhappiness and dissatisfaction to fulfillment, meaning, and joy. Now here is your host, career and executive coach, Tammy Guler-Loeb.
Hey, everybody. I am thrilled and delighted to invite my guest today, Dr. Gena Cox. After a decades-long career advising leaders in some of the largest companies in America, Dr. Gena Cox concluded that the pace of workplace inclusion change was unacceptably slow. She harnessed her organizational psychology and executive coach insights, her understanding of C-suite dynamics, and her personal workplace experiences to write a book, Leading Inclusion: Drive Change Your Employees Can See and Feel. Her book helps leaders connect unfamiliar dots to drive inclusion from the top of their organizations. Gena asks her clients to remember one simple idea: inclusion tops diversity. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Gena Cox. Welcome, Gena.
Oh, wow, Tammy, that is such a fantastic introduction. I feel like I need to do a curtsy or something. But the reality is that you are someone that I have known and admired from a distance and then gotten to know a little bit better over the last couple of years. And I'm just delighted to be here as a guest on your show.
And I've had you in my sights for the last couple of years thinking, I've got to get her on the podcast. So, but now that your book came out recently, it was just the best opportunity to have you on. And I can't say enough great things about your book, which I'll probably do throughout this conversation, but let's start at the beginning. So as you know, on Work from the Inside Out, we love to begin at the beginning. So share a little bit with us about your formative years and how they may or may not have informed where you are today.
Yeah. I had a very unusual upbringing in a way, and a very fortunate and very good childhood and early years. But, my parents were part of the generation that in the 1950s went to England. And people had gone to England from all the colonies, from all over the world, to help rebuild after the German Blitz. And because there was a shortage of workers for certain kinds of jobs, they had gone out to the colonies. And my parents had come from the Caribbean, from Barbados specifically. They hadn't known each other there, but they had gone to England as young people, and they had met there. And my mother was trained to be a nurse in British hospitals. My dad developed his career and so on. But at some point, their relationship broke down, and I ended up coming back to the Caribbean and lived with my grandparents. And let me tell you that my grandparents are, if you look in the dictionary and you see the definition of grandparents, warm and loving and nurturing and smile when you come into the room. I mean, you don't realize it, but those were the kind of grandparents I had. I was their only grandchild, and they doted on me. But more specifically, what that has to do with where I've sort of ended up today is that I've been lucky enough to have had, having been born in England, growing up in the Caribbean, having then lived in a third country, the United States, and then worked with clients from different parts of the world. One of the things that really informs my perspective on my whole career and everything I do is a somewhat global perspective. I have this sense that the world is pretty small. And I also have this sense that the humans I have met and all the places I have been very, very similar at the core in terms of what they want. So I don't see, I see that humans vary. And I say that, of course, a lot in my book, but I also have this sense that we're more alike than we are different. So there's that, I think. And one more thing I'd say, though, about my childhood, this wonderful childhood that I had, was that I wanted to be a journalist. And to this day, when I see reporters on television they're walking around and they're trying to interview somebody and they're trying to get to the core of the story, I'm like, man, I could have been doing that. But I didn't do it because my father, who had worked in the newspaper, The Guardian in England, had said, all journalists are alcoholics who smoke too much. You don't want to do that. That's what he said. these were ideas based on what he had observed. He said, study something else and then you can write about that. And so my dad was very smart to know, as he turned out to be completely right, that I'm, at the point I am in my career today. And over the years, I've always writing has always been a tool to help me share ideas. And so he was right. But at the time that he said it to me, I didn't want to give him, I didn't like that idea.
Right.
I really wanted to be a journalist. But today I get to be like a journalist in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, you do. Yeah. Because I know that you do a lot of writing, that your book is just one of many things that you've written. But when I say just one, it's a huge just one.
Yeah.
So you were born in England, but you spent more of your formative years in Barbados. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm an island girl to the core.
Okay. All right. And then but now you live in the US. So I'm curious about your immigration, or how you came to live in the US.
Yeah, I came to the United States actually for one simple reason. It was time for college. And my dad said, you know what? Let me back up. So
Sure.
I told you my parents had split.
Yeah.
And I was living in Barbados. My dad was living in the Bahamas. My dad, when he left England, he went to the Bahamas. And so when it was time for college, my dad said, why don't you come to Florida? You'll be closer to me. You spend all this time closer to your mother's family. Come to Florida. You'll be closer to me. And we can, develop our relationship more. So I came to Florida. That's what, I had some options. And that was what brought me to the United States. And so I came to the United States. I had actually done 2 years of what would be like the equivalent of, the first 2 years of college. I had already done those in Barbados when I got here. So when I got here, I think of myself as I was already kind of fully formed. I knew what I believed. I knew who I was and where, my place in the world and so on. Coming to the United States was, as a student, was quite an eye-opening experience. It was very, very different.
Yeah. And
all of the warmth and the support that I always felt as just the norm, frankly, it wasn't present. I didn't get as much of that validation on a regular basis. So I say in the book, but I also have said this for years, I kind of had to relearn who Gena was. And I certainly had to learn how to be an American.
Yeah, I can imagine it was a little bit of a shock.
Yes, absolutely. And there was a lot of upside too. I don't want to suggest that it was all negative, but it was definitely something where it was totally different.
Yeah. Well, I think, you hear about, let's say, I'm putting this in air quotes, kids go off to school for the first time, and it's their first time really being on their own. And I think there's always an adjustment about, who am I in this world, in this situation now? And you went into, an even more extreme, let's say, adjustment into, another culture, really.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Where in Florida did you end up landing?
Yeah, when I came to the United States, I lived in South Florida. I lived in Miami for a short time, and then I went a little further north to Broward County. You have connections in South Florida.
Yes.
So I was in Pembroke Pines and Plantation, which are two suburbs of Fort Lauderdale, if you would. Yeah. And so I know South Florida very well as a result.
Yeah. Okay. That just gives us a context, although that was a few years ago, but
sure.
It was what, 3-4 years ago?
Yeah, just the other
day. So clearly you made the adjustment. We know that because you're still here.
Yes.
And I'm a little envious that you must have dual citizenship, or you have European citizenship, I guess, right?
I do.
So you went to school in Florida, and then where did that take you? What did you study when you came over here?
Yeah, well, I've always studied psychology, but I didn't know about organizational psychology until after I got here. I was thinking that I was studying clinical psychology because that's all I knew about.
Yeah.
And I met this woman who had been a professor at University of Michigan Institute for Social Research, which is, in my opinion, the premier social science research entity in the world, I think, in my opinion, and very, very, very strong. And she had gone to school there. She'd been a professor there, and she kind of took me under her wing. And she was the one that said, "Have you thought about research-oriented psychology?" And I'm like, "Well, what is that?" Anyway, she introduced me to the concept of the research. She introduced me to organizational psychology and behavior. And that was when I discovered, I really love this, because before I came to the United States, in addition to studying, I had also worked for 2 years as what I would call an apprentice journalist. I had actually worked in newspapers for 2 years. And I had been lucky enough to be assigned to the business beat. Barbados is a small country, so it was not, it wasn't like, the kind of volume of activity one would have here. But I did develop the skills in those 2 years, or the comfort in those 2 years, in approaching business leaders and asking them hard questions. So when I heard about organizational psychology, you mean, you're in organizations, you're talking to leaders, you're observing human dynamics, and you're trying to make them better. I was like, ooh. And so that's actually how I got into this field.
I see. And so did you go right out of undergrad going right into grad school from there, or did you take some time in between?
I went directly from my bachelor's degree to a master's degree in industrial and organizational psychology at the University of Central Florida, actually. Yeah, in Orlando. And so that's a 2-year program. And I wasn't sure that I wanted to do a PhD at the time. I was deciding. Plus, I didn't have any money, and I wasn't sure I could afford to do it, because I was at that point, I was still a foreign student, and I was paying these, their fees were very high. So I did the 2-year program. And then in that 2 years, I got my immigration stuff all figured out and decided I would stay in the United States. And I went to work after the master's degree. I was very lucky. The first year or so, I worked at the university while I was finishing up my master's degree. Then I went back to South Florida to work for an English company, and that was in a company that was in telecommunications and digital data in the early days. So that was that company. And then I went to work for a Norwegian company, the Kloster family that owned at the time Royal Cruise Line, Norwegian Cruise Line, Royal Viking Line. So that was a completely different industry. I went from tech to hospitality. And then as I was doing those things is when I started to say, I'm really seeing how the real world works. I think I'll go back to school, and I think I want to go back to school. And my personal life was also a little bit disrupted, because I had gotten married, and I had this baby, and my marriage was falling apart.
Oh, wow.
And so I got divorced, and my daughter and I went off to do my PhD program when she was 2 years old.
Wow.
And I was restarting my life, and I went to the University of South Florida to do a PhD. And I remember, she was there every morning, she was a part of my whole graduate school experience.
Wow.
But it was fantastic.
So, I'm not laughing about the divorce part, of course.
I understand.
But I love the way you're depicting your 2-year-old being part of your grad, your PhD program. I remember when my daughter was very, very young.
Yeah.
I had to be at a board of directors meeting where I was working, and I told my boss, I said, I don't have any childcare tonight. She said, just bring her along. So that night, it was a furious rainstorm, and I'm carrying this kid, and I can't even carry an umbrella or anything. And the two of us walk into the board meeting totally drenched.
Yeah. But
it's like you just do what you have to do, right?
I was going to say, you do what you have to do. That is actually that story you told is very familiar to me, and is very relevant to my point of view about workplaces.
Yeah.
And all of the conversations that are being had now in workplaces about flexibility and parenting and caregiving and so on. I am so glad that they're happening, but it is like 180 degrees from how it was when I had when I was starting my career, and everything was so hard. So I'm glad that things are improving in that regard.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely. So how long now when you were doing the PhD, were you just, I don't mean to sound like were you just doing a PhD, because that's obviously a lot of work, but were you totally devoted to your daughter and the PhD at that time, or were you also blending that with other activities at that time?
Well, in a traditional PhD program like the one I went to, they require, your full-time subservience to the program. They own you for those, especially for the first few years. You have so much to do, you can't do anything else, and they discourage you from doing anything else. So it was school and research, and I was also a teaching assistant to make extra money and a research assistant. So everything, put it this way, my whole life revolved around the university. Especially those first 3 years when you're working on courses and preparing for exams and so on. And I was very, very lucky because the university had an early childhood education department and a child care center right on the campus. So I would drive to the campus, take her to that place, and then I would go to the university, to my program. I would be there all day. And so let's say that her program, the regular program, and then the after school program, let's say they ended about 6:00. I was working the whole day. And then I would, get there, pick her up, the drill, go home, the dinner and stuff. And so I did that for 3 years solid.
Wow.
Nothing, no variation from that.
Right. But how fortunate that you had that right there. That was amazing.
Absolutely. And the funny thing about it is, when I had moved up to the university, I had asked about these things and they had said yes, but it turned out to be even better than I expected, because, you visualize things. Literally, the street that I would come into the university from the main road, the school was right there. And getting from there to the actual cross campus to where my courses were, there was a ring. I mean, it was as easy as it could have been.
Yeah.
It wasn't easy, but it worked out very well.
Yeah. No, I hear you. I hear you.
Yeah.
And these sound like, these are not mundane things for anybody trying to really advance themselves. These are key things that you're talking about. So congratulations, you get your PhD.
Yeah.
And what was the next step from there?
Man, Tammy, I have to say, I meet so many great people, right? I have met so many great people. So I heard about this opportunity in a local company while I was in graduate school when I was wrapping up. And I had already said, I don't know if everybody else in my program was either going off to an academic position to be a professor at a university somewhere else, because when you finish a PhD, they don't like you to stay in that program. They want the ideas to sort of move around. So the people who wanted an academic career, they were going off to these various universities. And the people who wanted to do a practical career, practice and applied work like me, they were going to New York and Chicago and all the big cities.
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't feel like doing that. I was like, first, I got this daughter of mine. It's just going to be too hard. I'm going to stay in Florida. So I heard about this opportunity at this company, local company, and I was like, oh, well, I might as well go check it out. And it was actually a company called Raymond James Financial.
Oh, sure.
Yes. But when I went there, it was still, Raymond James the growth has been so phenomenal that sometimes it's hard for me to imagine it's even the same company. They've been so successful. It was already growing when I went there. But when I went there, I did not have high expectations. I kind of thought, I'll do this for a couple of years and then, get bored and move on. I did stay there for about 5 years. And in that time, I can tell you, it's the best thing I ever did. It's the best place I ever worked. The leaders are the leaders I admire the most to this day. I wrote about them in the book, by the way. It's not because it's simply that I had such a great experience. And I got to fully realize, wait a minute, it is possible for leaders to create the culture that they desire, for them to have the idea in their head and execute it. If they don't do that, they get a culture by accident. But Raymond James founder, Robert James, had an idea that people were going to be the center of the success of that company. And so I was just lucky to be one of those people who got to see that and influence that and contribute to that. I felt very lucky.
That's great. That's great. So what what made you decide that it was time to move on from there?
Mhm. Yeah, when I left there were a couple of things happening. One of them was that my daughter was now a little bit older, and I was thinking about her and being able to do some things with her. I was thinking that I would like to have a little bit more flexibility.
Mm.
And so I stayed in the same county, but I decided that I would have my own practice. And so for the next decade, I had my own practice as an organizational psychologist, consulting to companies, doing applied research, doing assessments, and doing coaching and a variety of things related to. I've always focused on helping leaders to be more effective.
Yes.
So that was the focus of the work I did for that decade. But it got me the flexibility I needed because working in financial services, it was very demanding. No two ways about that. And so I was able to then pick her up after school more and do activities with her and that sort of thing. So I really appreciated that period of time as well.
Yeah. And then there was a point at which you decided to go back into regular, as we say, regular employment, which what's regular, but
yeah, but yes, there was that time. And, when I did that, my daughter was now my whole life is kind of pretty much plotted along with what she's been up to.
Sure.
So she gets to the point now where, she's going off to college.
Okay.
And I'm thinking, well, this is a time now where I can do some other things. So it was right around that time that I started thinking, okay, well, maybe now I can, think about going back inside. And so I did. I started. I went back to work as a corporate consultant, organizational consultant, working with leading a team of people, and I really enjoyed that. And after the first job that I did after I went back was sort of more traditional organizational consulting for a company. But then I got this wonderful opportunity to go to work for IBM, and I couldn't pass it up because IBM was just now starting to use artificial intelligence to influence or guide, or they were building it into talent management systems. And they had this idea that they would, sort of dominate that by applying all their fantastic technology. So it was just interesting time for me to join and to watch all of that happening in the company. I was in a consulting part of the company, and we were focused on measuring, we measured employee opinions, and we designed tools to sort of capture behavior or understand activities. So it was a logical alignment with the AI piece, because AI is really about just capturing data.
Right.
And then it's understanding what it's saying and then using what it understands to predict a future. Or to recommend future action. So anyway, I got a chance to really at IBM be, sort of immersed in technology from the perspective of using it as a tool to help leaders be more effective. And so that was another fantastic experience. Yeah.
Wow. How long were you with IBM?
So I did that for about 5 years. And the only reason I left, because IBM is Raymond James will always be the company, only because it's kind of like your first love.
Yeah.
But IBM, it was an equally positive experience for different reasons. It's global. The experiences were global. The technology was unsurpassed. But they were sort of ahead of their time with this AI and in HR tech. And frankly, the division wasn't that successful. And so they decided that they were going to shut it down.
Oh.
And so I had to decide, do I do something else within IBM that I might not love as much, or do I do something else altogether? And I decided this is really now the time for me to sort of to do something different. And so I went to work for another company that focused on the things that I was doing at IBM, but that was all they did. That was the focus of their work. So focusing on using technology to measure opinions, and to understand social interactions, and to help leaders understand how to build employee experience. So I did that for a few years.
Wow.
And would probably have stayed at that company. I might still be at that company today.
Wow.
Except for two things that happened. The first, the pandemic. And we were then, well, I was already working from home. I'd been working from home for a very long time already. For IBM, I worked at home, and I was working at home for this company from home. But the pandemic came along, and I was measuring employee opinions at that time. And I realized that what leaders thought about what employees were experiencing was not what employees were actually saying they were experiencing. Um, Another thing I learned was that at the beginning, leaders were obsessed with this idea that employees who are now moving to remote work for the first time would not be productive. I think they thought we would all be twiddling our thumbs and watching TV.
Right.
And so they were very, very, they were at the beginning, leaders were not worried about the caretaking. They were worried about production, performance, productivity.
Right.
But then the data came out, and it showed very clearly that employees were actually more productive.
Right.
And also happier. And we've known this since 2020.
Yeah.
From measurement.
Right.
But so anyway, I was doing that kind of work, and things were going along, and I was thinking, I'm really beginning to focus on leaders again with a great intensity, and realizing, I gotta do something to help leaders be more human-centered. That was the event, that was the period of time where I said, you know what, leaders are still not getting it.
Yeah.
Well, so there was that. But then what really were the two things that precipitated me leaving that company were some horrendous things that happened that spring. First of all, Ahmaud Arbery was killed, and I saw that on television, and I thought, is that real? Like, is this real? It's so surreal to this day. And then a couple months later, Breonna Taylor was killed. And again, I'm working as an employee for a company, and I'm talking to people. But those two things, when they happened, I thought Breonna Taylor could have been my daughter. And that, to this day, is how I feel about her murder. But I was working, and every day I'm going to work, going through the motions. I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, but it's over here. It's like I can't get this out of my head.
Yeah.
And then in May, George Floyd was killed. By the time, you've heard me say this before probably, but by the time George Floyd was killed, that was a basket case. Because I felt like this is stuff happening, and I'm not part of the solution. I'm living my life like if everything is just hunky-dory, when it's just having a profound effect on me. So long story short, I left the company because I really said in that moment, I'm going to dedicate my life to really focus on helping people see that we're more alike than different, and that there are things we can do to support that idea. It's a point of view. And if you start thinking that way, then you start acting that way. Like I really believe that, and believed that. And so here we are. That's how the book came about. And that's why I'm doing the work I'm doing today.
So, I mean, I want to say it makes perfect sense. And there's a part of me that wants to say, I'm really sorry that you had to arrive at that point. And yet it needs to happen.
Yeah.
So, it would have needed to happen. It would have needed to happen anyway for so many reasons. I mean, regardless of those tragedies, it would have needed to happen.
But you know what, Tammy? I feel like that, like this is when I found my calling. Like, how you're alive. I've been alive all these years, and I was doing just fine. I could just continue to do what I was doing. But it became a calling because I was like, wait a minute, Gena. Well, you're uniquely qualified to help with this. You're a mother, you're an immigrant, you're an organizational psychologist, you work with executives, with leaders all the time. You are one of the people who look like the people who've had these negative experiences. There's so many things that perhaps you can offer some insights that other people cannot offer, because even if they did the research, they might not have had the lived experience. And you can put it all together, and maybe this will be how you help with this problem. So it was a horrible thing, but it also helped me to find this calling. And I sincerely believe that we can do better, and we will do better.
I love hearing that. And I'm so glad that you're doing what you're doing and who you're being. Mm-hmm. And so let's go to the book. First of all, What made you decide to write a book versus just take this work, let's say, on the road? I know you're doing speaking. I know you're doing consulting and coaching.
Mm-hmm.
There's a whole variety of things you're doing now.
Yeah.
What made you decide to write a book?
Well, as you can see from what I said in my career, I had been a leader of teams of people. I understand corporate life very well.
Yes.
I have been a speaker in the sense of always sharing ideas about the work. I've been a coach and all of those things. But what I realized I needed to have the most impact would be something that could really scale. So instead of focusing on one company or one leader at a time, I'm looking for solutions that could help me get this message out to a wider range of people faster. And when one thinks of that, a book is like the logical thing. The other thing about it is because I knew the topic of my work is somewhat taboo. There are people who don't want to have this conversation about race, ethnicity, gender, LGBTQ plus status, neurodiversity. And I didn't even want to have this conversation either. In fact, I had avoided this conversation for my entire career. But I also, a book, the nice thing about a book is that even a person who doesn't want to have this conversation could take this book in the privacy of their home, office, or whatever. They can read it, the parts that they need to read, and they can process.
Yeah.
Like they don't have to be, they can be very private. And there was something about that said to me, you know what, this seems to be the best medium for what you're trying to accomplish. Because even if you want to give speeches and stuff like that, which, speeches are great, but by definition, speeches have this entertainment component that doesn't always work so well when you're dealing with something where what people really, really want is to ask questions. They want to ask their question. So even though I do a lot of speaking and I do keynotes, I find that I do a lot more fireside chats and panel conversations and small groups with executives where it's more like a briefing because there are things they want to ask. You really, and so it's very custom. So anyhow, that's how the book idea came about. That's why the book is focused on leaders. And that's why the things I do around the book, the speaking and so on, are all complementary based on this notion that the audience, this is difficult for the audience, and I got to make it as easy as possible.
I love that. And I love that that's how you're approaching it and that's how you think about it. That's your mindset. Speaking of mindset, you bring a model from the very beginning of the book called the READI model, REDI. It's a respect first model. That's what the R stands for. Can you tell us a little bit about that model?
Very much so. So, I think by law, if you write a business book, you got to have an acronym, right? But in all seriousness, I mean, we all know the DEI, D for diversity, E for equity, I for inclusion. And there's those terms, there's nothing wrong with those.
Right.
But I had done some research in the summer of 2020 in preparation for the book. I had interviewed about 30 executive leaders. And one of the things I had asked them was, what gets in the way of you leading the conversation about inclusion in your organizations? That was one of the questions. And they were very honest. The people that I interviewed, they were very kind and very honest. They said, the first thing they said was, we're not sure this belongs on our plate. We're here to run a business, right? And this is not core to our business. Does it belong on our plate? Second thing they said was, the people who advise us say, you know what, this stuff is complicated. You're darned if you do and darned if you don't. If you do something and people don't like it, you get criticized. If you do nothing, you get criticized. So maybe you should kind of just take it easy, wait for the dust to settle, and then decide what to do.
I've heard that before.
Of course. And then the third thing they said to me was, we're not even sure what it is that the folk who want us to do this, the people who would be the beneficiaries of this effort, we're not quite sure that we know what they want us to do.
Yeah.
We don't know them well enough to know exactly what they want. So this is honest feedback, right? So I have this. And then on the other side, I did a survey of about 500 working Americans, including 149 Black women. This is a survey. And I asked them, what is it that you would want? One of the questions was, what is it that you would want leaders to know about your perspective on this issue? And here's what they said. They said, we already see that leaders are not believe we believe leaders aren't doing enough. What we see from leaders is that they are avoiding the issue, and by definition, they are avoiding us. So rather than moving closer to us, we feel like they back away, back away, back away. And when they do this, when you don't care enough to understand the issue so that you can then provide solutions that might be meaningful, what that feels like is disrespect.
Mm.
And when I kept hearing the word respect and disrespect, I was like, wait a minute, you know what? This sounds and feels so familiar. Respect is the thing that we all desire. I am going to use that as the foundation. I'm going to elevate the concept of respect to the core of this book and help people see that you can call things by a variety of names or whatever, but if you talk about respect, the advantage that it offers is that everybody knows what kind, people have a sense of what it means. They know whether they're getting it or not getting it, and they can tell you what they think is getting in the way. So my acronym REDI, or
Yes.
READY,
Right.
I call it a respect first model because the R, the very first letter, stands for respect. So it's respect, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And it is just a way to think about, if you don't have respect, if you don't demonstrate it, and if I don't feel respect in interactions with individuals or with an organization, all these other things you might focus on, equity, diversity, and inclusion, the fancy concepts and so on, they really don't matter, because at the end of the day, people will say, well, you know what, from the minute I walked in the door, from the minute I talked to this person, from the minute I did this, I could tell they didn't respect me, and people shut down.
Mm.
So it's it's a prescription for leaders to say, well, what is the culture of your organization from that interpersonal perspective? Because it is so key to why people might join a company but not stay with that company.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wow. As you're talking about this, I'm thinking about a number of organizations I work with that, where a lot of these, individuals and organizations I work with where these kinds of things seem to really, this echoes a lot of things I've heard.
Mm-hmm.
So the other thing that I wanted to mention about your book that I think also makes it sort of a safe place for people to go to is that at the end of each chapter, you offer an executive summary, which I think in very, let's say plain language, not too jargony, gives people a good overview of what you've covered in the chapter. Mm-hmm. And then some really great questions, as you call them, ready questions, that gets people thinking, mm-hmm. but in a way that really, I think it made everything. I feel like this book is so accessible.
Oh, good.
That it makes things accessible to anybody who's saying things like, well, how much of this is my business to deal with,
Right.
In the context of me being a leader of a manufacturing organization or a service organization, whatever, it doesn't matter.
That's right. That's right.
And I think the other thing I wanted to mention is I think this book should be distributed to parent-teacher organizations and volunteer organizations and individuals, not just leaders who are overseeing a big operation or even a small operation, because I think there's a level of awareness that has to start at every level of whatever organization we're talking about. And that's my opinion, which I always say you're entitled to. But I really, it is such a rich resource, and I can really appreciate the way that you went about the research that you put into this and the voices that are reflected here. This isn't, this is a voice of many that's reflected here.
Right.
Yeah.
And that was really important because I was I wrote a book about inclusion, and and my number one value about this is that I really mean that. I really mean that when I move around the world, my life is made better and easier to some extent, to the extent that I meet people and I just bring them into me, like regardless of who they are. I don't mean like I'm a human. So you meet people you like and people you don't like. That's human.
Sure.
Right? That's the human condition. I'm not talking about that.
Right.
I'm talking about when I see another human, I assume that they're like me. We have more in common than different. Now, again, there are things that can get in the way of that. So I try to start there. So in writing the book and knowing that I was writing it for leaders, I wanted the book itself to be a model because I wanted them to hear their own voices. I wanted them to hear issues that they are dealing with. And I wanted to have people speaking in this book. I didn't want it to just be Gena's voice because Gena has a lot to say. But you could say that Gena's point of view could be very biased because Gena, she looks like this, she has this particular experience. So it was important for me to interview a lot of people. And as you know, I interviewed business leaders. I interviewed people who focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion as their core work. I interviewed academicians. I interviewed people who are even experts at connecting with one another, with humans connecting. So I went far in the field, and it was very important to me also to interview and to include people who themselves represent, the diversity of American life. Yeah. And so I've got people of all races. I've got people of different genders. And I was very purposeful about that. Yeah. It was important to me.
Yeah. I think the one thing we would never say about you is that you're not thorough.
I think I may have overdone it, and frankly, from my editor's point of view, I could have made this book lighter and easier and shorter and a lot of things. But you know why I didn't do it? And this is a very simple reason, Tammy. You know that I'm older. I'm not just starting my career. Who knows if I get a chance to write another book like this, right? Who knows if so I decided something that one of my writing coach used to say to me. My writing coach would not necessarily have advised that I put all of this information in this book. She might think it could be 2 books.
Yeah.
But she's also always said that it is important when people are reading a book that they feel that you haven't held something back. Because, sometimes when you're writing a book, you have to decide, well, is this something I want? It's special. I want to keep it for this or whatever. But when a person is reading about the thing, the chapter or whatever, they need to feel like they got everything that brought them from point A to point Z of this idea, right? That's better. So I went whole hog into that approach and didn't hold anything back.
I can appreciate that. And I think the other thing I want to point out is, you did it with full self-awareness. And I think that the other piece I want to, that you did put yourself into the book. You put as much of yourself into the book as you did all the people that you either surveyed or interviewed. And it's a very fair, in my opinion, very fair and very rich resource. And there's nobody I would not recommend this book to.
Oh, well, I appreciate that. It's not an easy read. And by easy, I mean, it does require you to process. The whole point of the book is for people to have to think. But you can do it in the privacy of your own brain.
Yes, and you can do it incrementally. That's why I love the pieces at the end of each chapter. It gives you time to work with it. And I think I just think it's tremendous. So we need to wrap up. So how can people find you and learn more about your work or come hear you speak? I know that you're going to be out there. So what's the best way for people to find you, Gena?
Yeah, the best way is to go to my website, which is my name, GenaCox.com. Okay. Luckily, I have a short name. But you can also find me on LinkedIn and just use my name, Gena with an E, Gena, to find me on LinkedIn. And there you'll find a lot about what I care about, what I post about, what I write about, my newsletter. I have a LinkedIn newsletter. So you'll get to learn how I think and what matters, my point of view. And I'm very, very receptive to outreach. When people reach out to me, I always respond because I feel like I learn as much from the people who reach out to me as they from me, hopefully. And I know that connecting with me is not everybody that connects with me is looking to be my client or can be my client.
Right.
But it is very rewarding for me to hear from readers of the book and so on. So do reach out and let me know how I can help you do something or think something through.
I can testify that Gena is one of the most responsive people I know, and she means what she says. So one last question. So you've made many transitions, very thoughtful transitions throughout your career. What would be a key piece of advice you might give someone else as they're thinking about their next move?
Yeah, actually, the thing that I didn't get as advice early on is what I give to people as my first piece of advice now, which is that whether you're starting a job or you've been in a job, you have to think about your career as if you own it and not the organization. And therefore, the best piece of advice is to really figure out what it is that you want, whether you want it a year from now or 2 years from now, and to start to purposefully do the activities, the actions that can build the skills that you need for the next thing. So obviously you might not do all of that in your job.
Right.
So the concept of the side hustle is very powerful.
Yeah.
Because it means that, but don't just do it for the sake of making money, although there's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
Do the things that you do so that at the end you build a portfolio career. You build, you've got it's like a slice of pie and it's got 6 things that you need to master in that slice. Think about, are you hitting on those 6 things purposefully so that at the end of this 2 years, you'll have a whole pie.
Yeah,
and
I like that.
Never lose that idea. Just keep working on the bits and pieces that when you put it together will take you where you want to go.
Well, we are so aligned on that. Definitely. I love that. I love the pie metaphor. That's great, especially since we're recording this the day before Thanksgiving.
Ooh. Yes.
Gena, I can't thank you enough for being here today. This was wonderful. And I'm going to encourage people once again to purchase your book, Leading Inclusion, Drive Change Your Employees Can See and Feel. And it doesn't have to be anyone who has employees. Anybody should be reading this book. Thank you again.
Yeah, well, Tammy, thank you for that. And thank you for having me on your show. I'm honored to be here.
I hope you enjoyed my interview with Gena Cox. It was so interesting to speak with her and learn about her life, transitions, and current professional work. What is your key takeaway from our interview? If you are interested in any of the resources mentioned in today's podcast, you can find them in the show notes on my website at tammygulerloeb.com/podcast. Just look for episode 211. Are you anticipating your next professional move? Check out my award-winning book, Work from the Inside Out, Break Through 9 Common Obstacles and Design a Career That Fulfills You. It's available in print and ebook editions through my website, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, independent bookstores, or through your local library. If you were inspired by this episode with Gena, please share it with your friends and colleagues. And please do subscribe so you don't miss next week's show. Remember, subscribing is always free. If you're enjoying the podcast, I'd especially love to read your review on Apple Podcasts. It's easy to find through my website, tammygulerloeb.com/podcast. Just click on the Apple Podcast button and follow the instructions provided there. You can also help sustain the podcast by treating me to a cup of coffee. Just go to buymeacupofcoffee.com/TammyGL. Since this podcast is self-funded, I would so appreciate your generosity and support. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, it's never too late or too impossible to increase your sense of fulfillment and satisfaction in your work and other meaningful activities. I'd love to hear how it's going for you. Drop me a line. Bye for now.
Thank you for listening to the Work from the Inside Out podcast. For more information, you can find us at www.workfromtheinsideout.com.